everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for today's live. My hair's down, so it's going to be blowing all over the place. Welcome to the beach live today. As I always do, I love to show you guys the beach. So I'm just going to scoosh over and show you how beautiful that looks. It's so beautiful. Today we're going to be talking about some interesting, we'll do like a little bit of a recap because I had like a very interesting Mercury retrograde in Cancer. I was talking about I think it was about 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I think it's 2 weeks ago that I was talking about be careful with your technology because that's the Mercury retrograde thing, and water. And so I spilt some water on my cable box and it wouldn't turn on for like a day, and I was like, oh my gosh, and actually, to be very honest, I don't really watch a lot of television. I usually watch things off of streaming networks and so forth. If I watch anything at all, I don't really, to be honest, like watch every once in a while I'll get into like a show or something, but it's a large commitment for me, and there's so much to do and build, in terms of business, and I would probably always prefer to read, but still, I mean, it sucks because at my condo we have free cable. So I was just like, and after a day, I guess it dried. I don't know what happened, but I have cable again. I actually haven't tried to turn it on to see if it works, but I know the light came on and it's showing the time and everything. But I was just thinking to myself, God damn it, that is such a Mercury retrograde in Cancer season, just fucking up the technology with some water. And I had been very, very careful, like with my phone around water and everything else like that, and I was just like, So anyway, it's always funny when those things happen. Another thing that's interesting as you talk about like this energy and this time, we were talking, I think about a week ago or 2 weeks ago about sorry, there's like a little bird so close to me. Yeah, I thought it was like gonna sit on my lap. I love birds, as I mentioned before, and obviously I'm outside, so all things can happen. It's like improv here, I'm not in a controlled setting. But we were talking about Mars and Aries, and that day when I made the video, or maybe not that day, but like a couple of days after when I made that video, I was on Facebook and I saw literally like 3 people that I know got bit by centipedes. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's such like a Mars and Aries, the inflammation, the biting, the fire, the pain that you feel. And most of them were all on Maui. And as like, in case you guys don't know, in Hawaii, we don't have any snakes. We don't have anything that like at all, animal wise that can, like get you in a lot of other tropical places that have that. I mean, we definitely have like wild pig, and you don't want to get like skewered by that. But I mean, in terms of like things that are like venomous or poisonous and things like that, we don't have like mammals that do that. So our biggest fear here is the centipede. And I like say the voice very softly because I feel like when I say it a lot, they come, and so I'm not trying to invoke that. It's like an inside joke between me and my son. It's like Voldemort. We're like, he who must not be named. So if you live here for any period of time, you're gonna see those fuckers in your house, and they're notoriously hard to kill, and the pain is pretty bad for people who've gotten bit, and a lot of times they're heat seekers, so they like oftentimes you're waking up in the middle of the night screaming because they got into your bed and in your sheets and got you. So I saw that one of my Facebook friends was literally bit in the balls, I just think of, and I'm not laughing because it's actually not funny, but it's just at this time I make this video and we're talking about Mars and Aries, we're talking about the warrior, and Aries is that masculine energy, and it's just to be bit by this like venomous creature in your balls is insane. Oh, you're cracking up. It is. And I was just like that. And so and then like, because, and I just have to take this moment out of my life because this was really funny. And because it's like all my Maui friends, and all my Maui friends are super hippies and stuff. So they're all like, oh my God, we're like totally like, put crystals on your balls, like amethyst is really good for that. you know, and then like people are like, I'm totally praying for your balls right now. And I just was like, oh my God, this feed is insane. And me like ridiculously is like, oh my gosh, that's Mars and Aries, man. And so it's so funny. I mean, it ended up, the guy is okay. You know, he took care of it. I don't know if it was the crystals or bentonite clay. I'm not sure, but he's fine. But then all of these other people were posting like, oh my gosh, you know, that happened to me, or I just saw one. And it's just interesting how like when you are talking about the astrology and you're talking about the movement of things in our world, when you actually see those examples, and you can see those examples in like real life ways, and you can see them in ways like this, where it has to do with something that I wasn't even thinking of. And just like I said, so interesting that like 3 people had these like centipede experiences as soon as Mars went into Aries. Not to mention just, you know, all the volatility and stuff that happens with that. So anyway, that's an aside. It's a fun aside, but I just wanted to chat a little bit about that. Today, though, we're going to talk about something like kind of on the other end of that, which is about Chiron. And Chiron is in Aries. So many things are in Aries. So we have like a lot of interesting energy happening right now. So just to tell you guys a little bit about Chiron. So Chiron is actually not a planet. It's a planetoid. It's kind of a little bit more considered a comet, but it does have a movement that we can track. So like Lilith or Black Moon Lilith and Chiron, you know, these are planets that were discovered, I want to say in the 70s, or might even be in the 80s. I actually don't right now recall exactly when it was discovered, but it's not one of like the original personal planets. So, you know, this is something that can affect you depending upon where it's placed in your chart. It depends on, you know, like how deeply it can affect you. But Chiron is known as the wounded healer. The name is actually given to part man, like the upper part is a man and the bottom part is a horse, which is very similar to Sagittarius. So you often find a lot of similarities in that sense. And he was a Greek. He wasn't a Greek god, but he was, I want to say, the son of Kronos, who's associated with Saturn, and one of the sea nymphs. And because he came out, you know, looking like a half horse and half man, his mom didn't want him and rejected him. And so he was this initially abandoned creature. And then Apollo, who's the sun god, found him. And Apollo has all of these, you know, beautiful attributes about music and poetry and all of those things. And he kind of like raised him. So he raised Chiron with all of this like music and art and poetry and beauty and warmth. And so he was able to kind of do some healing with that. He also was a great intellectual person. And again, like I said, that connection to Sagittarians with knowledge and like higher knowledge and higher learning. So he also trained, again, this is in the Greek mythos, he trained Achilles. And he also trained Hercules. And unfortunately, when he was training Hercules shot an arrow and shot him in the leg, somewhere around, actually, I think in the foot, somewhere around where his Achilles heel is, interestingly enough, and injured him. And because he's immortal, he has this injury that was incredibly painful injury, and he basically was going to live in pain for the rest of his life, but he still tried to help out people and help out the other gods. And so he's called the wounded healer. And there's a little bit more to the story than that, and like eventually what happens and how he ends up being put into the sky. And I think I might talk about that. I've been really going back and forth about, because I love myth and mythology, obviously, because I love astrology and all of that stuff. And so I was thinking about doing a little story time with everybody where I kind of retell these myths, you know, and what we kind of get out of them. So I'm still thinking about how I'm going to formulate that and what platform. I'm thinking that I might put that up on Facebook, whether I want it to be an audio thing or whether I want it to be something that's has some visuals to it. So I'm still thinking about it. But anyway, so back to Chiron being known as this wounded healer. And for those of us who've had these core wounds, that's essentially what happens. So Chiron is retrograde. We're actually, Chiron has been in Aries since, let's see, do I have that date? Did I write that date down? Well, I don't have the date exactly when he entered Aries, but I do know, I think he's in Aries until 2026. So we're going through a Chiron retrograde right now, which means that those original core wounds, the things that kind of hurt us in the beginning, are things that are coming back at this time. So Chiron retrograde is going to be July 11th through December 15th. Chiron will be in Aries at that time. And we're actually ending our Mercury retrograde, thank goodness, even though other than my cable box, I'm glad to be done with it. I'm always glad to be done with Mercury retrograde because I always feel like I have like challenges in just communication and getting out the things that I want to get out effectively. And I do consider myself an effective communicator, but when Mercury's in retrograde, I'm always kind of like, I feel searching for my words. And so we're ending a Mercury retrograde in July 12th. We're entering the retrograde of Chiron in July 11th. So that's coming right on up. So one of the things that Chiron teaches us in terms of our core wounds, and actually let me first just define a little bit what a core wound is, because some people might be unfamiliar with that word. So essentially our core wounds are the wounds that we usually sustain before 12 years old, kind of when we were children. So they're core wounds of abandonment, wounds of feeling unloved, wounds of feeling not good enough, of not being perfect, not being the perfect child. A lot of our core wounds have to do with our family life, how we were viewed, what our birth status was in the family. If we were the oldest child, we were supposed to be the responsible one. If we were the middle child, we were the one who was kind of a lot of times often forgotten. If we were the youngest child, we were the one who was made to feel that we weren't able to do things because we were always kind of taken care of all the time by everybody. And so, there's a lot of different things that have to do with, where that core wound came from and how it manifested. But a lot of the times it has to do with how we feel about ourselves. A lot of times people's core wounds have to do with their physical bodies, a lot of the time, whether the body was big enough or small enough or sexy enough or thin enough or tall enough or short enough or just pleasing enough, whatever that means. For everybody, and for everybody it's different because we're all in these different bodies, and a lot of us feel that we wish we had another one. It comes up for a lot of people I know, and I have a couple friends that have shared that it comes up for them feeling stupid. If somebody told you early in your life, maybe you had a teacher that didn't value the things that you were good at, or if you had an early challenge in school and your teachers and other students or your family members or people close to you said, oh, you're so stupid, you'll never be able to get things. This is a wound that we carry throughout our lives, feeling like, I'm not good enough, I'll never be smart enough, I can't really do this, I'm dumb, so-and-so so much smarter than me. I've heard a lot of people say that, and I've also listened to quite a few women say that too, like, oh, well, I'm not as smart as my husband, or he handles all this stuff, I'm the pretty face. Not so much that somebody's putting it on them. You get to be an adult and you start to actually embrace those things yourselves, and it's like a little caveat. It's like your little monologue before you meet somebody. You're like, hey, this is who I am, and guess what, I'm not enough in these many ways, ha ha ha, and then let's go on and have our friendship and relationship. And I know we all know people that are like that, where some people, a lot of people, I would say probably most people, carry their core wound deep inside, and they're like, I'm going to protect this at all costs, nobody will know. And some people, as an extreme form of protection, will actually put it right up in your face. They're just like, hi, this is my core wound, blah 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 blah, and let's be on with it. And they're just different ways of protecting yourself, really. One way is just if no one ever knows, they'll never hurt me, and the other way is, I'm going to tell you, so I'm going to take the power away from it, so you'll never hurt me. So Chiron reminds me a lot of, I remember watching this really cool video, and I believe it was Chinese, it could be Japanese, but I believe it was like this video on Chinese pottery. And it was talking about like when really beautiful pottery breaks, that they use gold to put the pieces together. So when you put the pieces back together, you still see the cracks, but you see all this beautiful gold in between the cracks. And to me, that reminds me a lot of Chiron energy and how we kind of mend things together. It's all about taking our core wound, or the thing that hurt us in the deepest sense, and healing that. And once we heal that, it becomes medicine for the other challenges that we have in our lives, the other wounds, and it also can become medicine for everyone else. And I just think that's really beautiful. It really is medicine for the people. It really is taking the things that were challenging to us and saying, wow, that really sucks, and I'm going to look at these things and I'm going to methodically go through, what happened and change the way I feel about them. And I also am going to make sure in any way that I possibly can that no one else has to deal with that. And it reminds me a lot of, I remember listening to Tony Robbins speak about, him when he was little, suffering from extreme poverty and not having food, which is like core need right there. Just housing and food are like the base things that, like, all of us absolutely need before we could think of doing much of anything else. And how that was something that hovered, I'm totally paraphrasing this story, but how that hovered around him his whole life, and which is one of the reasons why now, and even early in his career, he buys meals to make sure that people are fed for Thanksgiving and Christmas and so forth. So that's just another really good example of someone who had a core wound, and a core insecurity of not having enough and not even being able to have food to put in your mouth, and then changing that and empowering yourself. And I believe he's an Aries too, so that's kind of interesting, as we talk about this, because Chiron is an Aries. And then making sure that everybody else will have something, because I don't want you to suffer the way that I did. Why I think this is so important is because right now we hear a lot of, well, I suffered, and I did this hard thing, and if I did it, everybody else should be able to do it. We all need to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and do whatever. This is kind of this meritocracy type thinking about, I had it hard, and because I had it hard, that's how I grew and that's how I built strength. So you should have it hard too, because that's how you're going to grow and how you're going to build strength. And I can see, because I never negate these philosophies, all of them, and these ideas. I think that there is something to adversity. And especially when we're talking about Aries is all about warrior energy, hero energy, like the athlete. And when you think of warriors, athletes, any of that kind of energy, they always have an obstacle in front of them. And they're pushing through that obstacle like the ram, which is like the animal of Aries, right? They're pushing through that obstacle to get to the other side. And it's through that competition is how they end up being a better person. This is Aries in all of its glory and its good, positive energy, energetic sense, right? And so I value that. Oh, oh, thank you. So I value that energy. I value the energy of the warrior. I value the energy of the healer, going through the steps, going through the tough time and coming out the better person. But I also think that the healer, which isn't exact opposite energy, I think it works in alignment with that. I think that it's totally okay. You see that healer energy when you watch. My son is super into MMA, right? And so he got me into MMA. And I've never been into boxing or anything, but it's mom-son bonding time, and you got to do what you got to do. So oftentimes when the guys are go back to their corner, they're massaging them and they're icing them down and they're doing, whatever, putting stuff on them or whatever, again, this is total mom talking about MMA. But that is the healing aspect. They're whispering to them, or they're telling them, or okay, this is what you want to do. When you go back in, you're going to hit them like this, and you got to check those leg kicks, and you got to do that is somebody that's in your corner, that's fighting for you, that's healing you, that's giving you information. A lot of times, the people who are training boxers, or people who were boxers themselves, or they've had or kickboxers, or jiu-jitsu masters or black belts or whatever, and a lot of times people have had that career and did quite well, but maybe they've sustained an injury, or maybe they had a family, or maybe things changed for them, or they even just got older, and so now they're no longer able to participate in the fight the way that they want to, with their bodies in there, but they're able to train somebody and to see that through and to help that person, reach their goals. So again, that to me is Chiron wounded healer energy, specifically when you're no longer able to do it because of age, because of wounds, because of money, because of whatever the wound is, whatever the thing is, you're going on and say, instead of saying, well, I had to learn how to box on my own and I didn't have any help, which everybody obviously does, you just go ahead and do that yourself. We're not talking about that. And I feel like that is not the best way for us, especially right now moving forward as a collective. We are communal beings, and we work best together in groups. Individually, the human is a very interesting thing. The human by itself is not the smartest mammal. It's just not by itself. There's something about all of us working together in community, and whatever that community looks like, if it's a large community, if it's a family unit, if it's a friendship, if it's a business partnership, if it's your business and partnering with another business, there is something about us communally coming together and being strong, you know, and being able to achieve the greatest heights together. And you even see that when you look at some of the old minds, like especially like old scientists and old physicists, they would sit around, and even old writers like Tolkien, like there's so many of them, Einstein, all of them, they had collectives. They would sit there and talk to each other. They would challenge each other's ideas. They actually helped each other grow exponentially. There's something in that, in the collective in terms of humanity. So I feel that, you know, when we have this wounded healer energy, there is something to that about learning from your own challenge and then giving back or paying it forward, so to speak. I like that, actually. I love the idea of like paying it forward. I love that, those words. Let's see. What else did I want to talk about? Okay. I have notes. I always have notes. Oh yeah. Okay. So what I wanted to talk about before I wrap up, is, I pulled a card that I thought was a really good example of, Chiron, in Aries, and it's this one. And this one is the 9 of Wands. And you can see the guy here, right? He is the wounded warrior. We see a man who looks like he's probably like on the top of the castle, and he's in some sort of a defensive stance. He's got a head wound, and there's wands that are all around him, and it can be interpreted in so many different ways. Wands in front of you, that like this is what you're defending against, or wands behind you, which is the support that you have so that you can continue to quote unquote hold the door, right? Like Hodor, which is essentially what he's doing here. I'm going to let you guys see it one more time, right? And so I thought that was a good analogy, because we see a person alone, and we're getting more into what Chiron feels like when it's in Aries. It's really about like healing yourself, taking the time to heal the wound that you have, your personal core wound, and looking into that and figuring out a way that you can get on the other side of that. And a lot of times that's something that is done on your own independently, and or done in a very, or at least when it's in Aries, done in a more aggressive manner. It really is about kind of like pushing up against something to get to the other side of it. Really putting on the cape, you know, for yourself, and saying like, okay, I'm going to really attack this thing so that I don't have this to continue to keep me down, or I don't get to have this wound be the thing that I use as an excuse as to why I'm not moving forward in my life the way that I need to. So because it's retrograde season, it's coming back. This is not energy, or this isn't a wound that hasn't touched you before. It absolutely has. And sometimes it comes around in this very like spiralic way, almost like a set of steps where the higher you get, when you get to your next level, it's coming back around again, and you're like, fuck, like I thought I healed that. Like why am I still cycling back through this? Because it's a core wound. And you know, the thing is that with the core wounds, they might always have like a little bit of a sensitivity, even though almost like a real wound, even though when we get over it, there might always be things that kind of trigger it a little bit. And that's nothing to feel like. Sometimes you're able to fully heal the wound, and sometimes you're not. Sometimes it's always going to create a weakness in your body in some way. Sometimes I know when people break their wrist or their ankles, something that usually they work a lot or put a lot of pressure on, there's always this sensitivity. It never feels like it always goes back, 100%. Or people who, have like had major spinal injuries, there's always something that feels, or brain injuries even, feels that it's like just not completely there. Strokes, for example. And so you're negotiating around that when that pain comes back. If you're a person that maybe suffers from chronic pain, when you feel like, okay, like I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I don't have the energy for that. Whenever that thing happens physically in our bodies, or even just like emotionally in our lives, we have to take that time out, just like you would for your body, and say, okay, I need to stop and I need to rest for a second. I need to grab some water. I need to, replenish myself. And if we would do that with our bodies, because our bodies is interesting, it just makes makes us stop. Like our minds and our emotions, we can push and push and push those. We can continuously allow ourselves to be in situations that are really unhealthy for it for a long time. I mean, I think that just goes to show how amazing the mind is, in that sense, and the spirit is, that it takes, like, I think, so much more abuse sometimes than the body can, because the body will just shut down. I once was in a group, a creative group, with a woman who was sharing that she was a dancer, and she had mentioned that she was going through some really traumatic, emotional things, and one day she woke up and she couldn't move. She couldn't physically move her body. And it was so interesting to me, because every part of her and everything that she did was so dance based. Like, even when she expressed herself, it was like rhythmic in the way that she expressed herself, and the way she walked like a dancer. I mean, we all know what dancers look like. I think she had, like, classic ballet training, but she did, like, all kinds of dance. But she was not able to move. She was in the hospital for, like, weeks. And she discussed how, like, the things that were going on in her mind, and the things that were going on in her heart, and I believe the relationship that she was in, she was not able to process that on an emotional or even on a heart level, but her body was like, we're out, and just shut down, and it shut down everything, and it forced her in the hospital, having no idea what happened to her. She didn't know if she, like, caught a virus, and like, she didn't know if she was paralyzed. She had no idea what was happening to her, but again, it was what was going on in her mind that locked up the body. So I feel like as we move forward in thinking about, like, how we can best heal ourselves from our core wounds, we understand that there's only really one way to go through it, and it's to face it. It's to look into it. It's to, sit in the place of discomfort. It's to sit in the shadow, which is a lot about what we talked about last week. This is very similar in a lot of ways to last week's live. It's about integration. It's about healing. And it's about making those baby steps so that when we come back to it, when somebody says something that makes us feel dumb, when we see something that makes us feel unattractive, when somebody rejects us from something that we thought, oh man, I knew for sure I could get that job or get that person as a partner, or whatever it is that you wanted to get, it's not tracking all the way back, and we can start to see those things in our lives. We can start to see, like, it's, to me, it feels like, oh, core wounds, like, but there's something really empowering in looking at something that you're going through in the current time, like right now, and it invoking this really large response in you, and then you being able to take a moment and say, okay, so where is this coming from? Especially when the response is a little bit larger than it normally would be. Like, we all have, like, a place where when stuff pisses us off, like, we react at different levels, and we react at different levels to different things, right? But sometimes we'll have reactions that are just really not, like, the source of what happened, the reaction was like triple that. That's a really good indicator that it hit somewhere that was a core wound for you. And so going back there and looking at that work and looking at, like, okay, what is it that I need to deal with? Because that just massively brought up a whole bunch of things with me. And sometimes it's you, honestly, sometimes it's just the things that you have to work through. It wasn't an intention of what somebody said to you. Sometimes it is something that you have to work through, but you're finding yourself in a situation where, wow, this situation is very, very, quote unquote, triggering to me. Like, constantly, as long as I'm with this person, as long as I'm in this job, as long as I'm doing this thing, I'm constantly feeling like I am fighting, and that might be a situation that you need to step out of, because no one should be living in the fight or flight all the time. Right. Let's see. So to close, today, I wanted to talk about, like, what are some of the things that we can do? And I'm actually going to be doing a YouTube video on the 4 ways, suggested ways, or 4 optional ways that you can heal your core wound. But I feel like just two methods that I want to close you guys with, and then I will make sure that I post when I put that video on Instagram and all of that kind of stuff, is through fighting and soothing. which is interesting. But especially, since we're in Aries, it is time to step up to the fight, to look at that core wound, to look at it and to say, okay, I'm going to deal with this. I remember here's a personal story for you. I was having an issue with a person in my life when I was very young, and I felt very oppressed by this particular person. And I used to have these reoccurring dreams that I was fighting them. And it was so interesting because I wouldn't necessarily ever consider myself like a fighter. I'm a Leo, so I'm gonna step up if I need to step up, but in terms of I always would, use my words or, feel like, okay, this is weird energy, I'm gonna get out of that situation. But in this dream, it was a physical fight. It wasn't even like a verbal fight. It was like a physical fight, and I would have this recurring dream, and I would feel really bad about it, and I felt like a lot of different ways about it because this is a person that I cared about in my life. And so I had one dream this one particular time where I just, in the dream, because I actually am able to recall dreams very well, and I'm also able to kind of manipulate my dreams. I've always been able to do that, and we can definitely talk about that later if anybody's interested in dream work, because I have always been very awake in my dream state and had fairly good recall. And also will dream about people and then call them and be like, what's going on? And they're like, oh my God, how did you know? And I'm like, because I had a dream about you. I was like, whatever's going on, it filtered in. And that's happened a lot to my friends, a lot. But, going back to it, it was in the dream where I turned around and I asked that person, what's going on? Why are we doing this? Why are you treating me this way? And I just confronted instead of going through this battle. And then after that, I stopped having the dream. And so it was interesting because I was battling in the dream, and one thinks sometimes that when you're battling, you're actually winning, you're wrestling with it, right? But it was just this dream of battling, and it wasn't until I turned around and just called the person on it and called the person on what they did and told them how I felt that everything kind of ended. Now, what's interesting is when that happened in my dream, in real life, situation was that I wasn't able to tell that person that at the particular time because they were very sick. And I wasn't able to kind of go into detail, but I did within myself. I was able to heal, from just the dream work, from just my psyche, from the core wound there. So turning around and facing it, being the warrior and fighting and speaking up and saying things is one way that we can get over our core wound. And I think soothing is the other. And I love the word soothing. I feel like that's so I think that would be my favorite word of the week, to soothe, just because I think we don't soothe enough. It has a connotation of being something that we do for babies, and adults don't soothe. Adults go do things that they have to do, right? And I think when we're dealing with core wounds, since they're childhood wounds, we do have to soothe. We do have to find a way to ease ourselves into a different way of looking at things. Once we face it, once we have that kind of warrior hero energy and facing it and looking at it and stopping either confrontation with maybe where the core wound came from, or even if it's just confronting, the fear within ourselves, there is a certain amount of soothing, because it is a deep, deep wound, and it is something that will kind of sort of spiral up into. If the core wound was around money, I grew up without money, I didn't have enough money, we didn't have access, then every time you up level, interestingly enough, make more money, you instantly drop into, oh my gosh, what if I lose it? And you would think that, oh no, if my core wound is about money and about, not having prosperity and not having enough, the more money I make, the happier I will be. Yes and no. The happier you'll be in the sense of yay, I made more money, and the more afraid you're going to be about, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose all of this money. How, it's it's so much. What if it gets taxed? What if somebody steals it? What if I make the wrong investments, And so it's interesting how with the way core wounds works, it's almost the more we get that should be healing it is the more afraid we are. It's very anti-intuitive in that way, and I think that's why people get really confused with it, and they keep it and they keep having to cycle through it all the time, because we're always changing and our status is changing and what's happening is changing. And then if you do have a loss, let's say for this they made a bad investment, or COVID happens and your business is closed, you're like, God damn it, I knew it was going to happen, this is the worst thing that could happen, and you're freaking out about it and all of that, because it's just trekking back to that original wound. So soothing yourself, creating an environment for yourself where you feel comfortable, maybe saving some of that money, putting it to the side, investing it in a way that's very secure and comfortable for you. I mean, if it had to do with money, if it has to do with things like weight, I can't stress enough how much like clothes that you feel good in, that fit you well, however it is that you like clothes to fit you, how good that feels, even if it's not the size that you want it to be. And I think we definitely know about that, right? We know what that feels like. You're like, but it has to be this size, and it's like, or if it's like, how can I fill this out, depending upon where you are and your weight. So soothing ourselves, buying the things that make us feel attractive, reading the things that make us feel like, okay, I'm gaining knowledge and I'm definitely more intelligent, putting up boundaries so that people are not abusing you in any way. Saving, like if the core wound is around abandonment, then you are going to want to choose friends and choose lovers and choose partners and people in your life that as best, because we know people are people and there's never a guarantee that they're going to stay in our lives, but you're going to want to choose solid people that you feel good about, people who are available. Oftentimes people whose core wound is abandonment, they choose the most unavailable person to fall in love with. It's like, oh, like you have a new boyfriend or you have a new girlfriend, and they're like, yeah, they live like 5,000 miles away, and you're just like, oh, you know what I mean? That's something that happens a lot. Or like your, issues abandonment and they're married. That's probably not a great choice. So we want to start choosing things that are soothing to the core wound, so that as we negotiate through it, because we're going to have to negotiate through it, we're not negotiating through it and then all the other stuff, right? We just don't want to we want to like make these really healthy choices, so then we can just address the wound instead of like making choices that are not good for us, and then we're addressing all of the stuff that's happening currently in our life that's not working and the core wound. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you guys so much for joining into this live. If you like this conversation about core wounds, definitely tune in, and I will post, as I said before, I'm going to be doing a little bit more of an in-depth video about healing, specifically like the steps to take to heal, because I really wanted to really like go through this, because this is important, because we all have these, and a lot of times we have more than one, several dozen perhaps, right? A lot for some people. So we want to definitely talk about that. But thank you guys so much for joining in to the beach live today. You can find me at the Wild Wahine. You can book a tarot reading or an astrology reading. I do have a reading that has to do with core wounds and healing. It's my water reading. So if you go to the link in the bio in Instagram, you can book a reading for that, and we'll definitely do some work around that. And I have a YouTube channel, The Wild Wahine, and let's see, my email is kaylani@thewildwahine. So thank you guys so much. I always end my lives with a beautiful picture of the beach. It's so calming today, and like the sun is really out now, so now I need to go jump right on in. So thank you guys so much for joining in. If you like this video, feel free to share it and comment below, and if anybody has any really interesting ways that they deal with their core wounds, or if you feel like the energy is heavy and things have been popping up, feel free to comment below, or you can always email me. And thank you so much, and have a beautiful day. Aloha, everybody. Bye.